Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to another video in the old studio. 4K, is it worth it? This is something I touched on a couple of years ago, and in fact it's actually been the most popular video I've ever made. It was titled 4K UHD TVs. Are they worth it? You can go and check that video out in the top right hand corner of this screen, but the problem is that video's out of date. When I made that video there was no PS4 Pro, there was no Xbox One S, and there was no UHD Blu-ray. So this video aims to recap quickly what 4K is, whether it's worth buying, and more importantly whether it's worth buying in today's market now that we've got some actual 4K capable devices. And so then, before we can actually answer whether 4K is worth it, what actually is 4K? Well, technically 4K has a resolution of 4096 lines of pixels by 2160. This is DCI's Cinema 4K. But for what most people will actually use, we use UHD, or Ultra High Definition. This has a resolution of 3840 by 2160, which is 4 times the amount of pixels than a standard 1080p display. This means that it is a lot sharper, or 4 times sharper, than standard Full HD. And this means that as long as you've got a big enough screen to actually see the difference, you're going to be getting a sharper, clearer image that is better to the eyes. But in order for us to actually use 4K and notice a difference, then we're going to need a big enough screen, or at least sit close enough to a screen to actually see those pixels, and we're going to need 4K content. So having a large enough screen size, well, in your standard everyday room, I'd recommend a 55-inch or above TV. In my standard sized lounge, I have a 49-inch TV, and personally I don't really think this is big enough unless you sit really close to it to notice a massive difference between standard 1080 and 4K. There's no doubt about it that if you sit close enough to the display, you can notice a big difference and that it looks amazing, but in a standard everyday home, you may not notice the difference unless you have a big TV. And of course, you're going to need 4K content. So this could be through Netflix, it could be through a UHD Blu-ray disc, or it could be through a games console, or at least a 4K games console like the PS4 Pro, or you could use something like a gaming PC to actually output a 4K signal to your display. So as long as you have the content and a big enough screen size, you're going to see a benefit from a 4K display. So that's the recap on the stuff you probably already knew. But what has actually changed over the last couple of years? Well, mainly it's content, and because of new devices, more 4K content exists. Now, before we had things like Netflix and we had Amazon Instant Video, both of which now have an even larger library of 4K content. So if you want to watch something in 4K, it doesn't have to be some tech demos anymore. You can actually quite happily watch brand new shows. Things like the Grand Tour, that is coming actually next week, is in 4K, and you're going to be able to enjoy it on your 4K TV. But sadly, the standard television, so things like Sky and Virgin Media, the majority of content, so 99.9% of content, is still in 1080, but that is definitely changing because both Virgin Media and Sky have 4K services, or at least 4K services that are coming. But we have some brand new devices that we didn't have 2 years ago that makes 4K a lot more exciting. We have things like the Xbox One S, which I do own, a PlayStation 4 Pro, which I don't, and then a whole wide array of 4K capable devices. Things like the Chromecast is even in 4K now, so getting 4K content is reasonably easy, and 4K TVs themselves are a lot cheaper, they're more readily available, and as such it's a lot easier now to recommend buying a 4K TV. But does that mean that you should? Well, this is actually a question I can answer fairly unambiguously. The answer is yes. Please go out and buy a UHD TV if you're buying a new TV of a decent size. So unless you're buying something like for a bedroom, I would recommend you buy a UHD TV, mainly because it's very difficult not to. If you're spending over the £450 mark, which I think a lot of people do, then it's fairly difficult not to buy a UHD TV, as they're more readily available than ever, they're cheaper than ever, and you're not really paying a premium now for a UHD TV. They're just available, and it's become less of the forefront, and a lot of people are now talking about something called HDR. HDR is high dynamic range, and that essentially means you've got a larger contrast on your screen. So the blacks are blacker, the bright bits of the scene are brighter, and it's just a nicer, more pleasing image. And the way it's mastered is going to depend on whether it looks a bit wacky or whether it actually looks like realistic and nice. And it's something that conventional TVs just can't do. They can't display really black blacks and really bright brights at the same time, or at least they can't do that very well. High dynamic range TVs are going to do this a lot better, and the easiest way to go and see this for yourself is to go down to a TV shop, and I'm sure they'll have a demo for you, and you can see for yourself whether it's actually something you are interested in. But of course there is a problem, and this is something that you no doubt have already guessed if you've been following these videos. What is the problem with a new format and something that is new and something that people haven't seen before? Content. There isn't much HDR content out there. Netflix currently is leading the way with a few HDR titles. Things like Marco Polo Season 2 is in HDR, but just like 4K before it, there's barely any. YouTube is now just supporting HDR in the next few months or so, I believe, but it's going to take a while to catch up. PC monitors. I don't know of any HDR monitors that are coming out, but I've had a chat with a few execs and they hinted that there might be some soon, so I'd expect at CES we're probably going to see some HDR PC monitors. As far as TVs go, they're actually fairly readily available and you can get them for as low as £500 in the UK. But not all HDR TVs are created equal, because HDR is the difference between the darkest blacks and the brightest brights, and the better TVs can do that better. So while the content might, say, display a black at a really black level, and then it might display a white at a really bright level, if the TV can't actually reproduce that, well, it's fairly pointless. So the more you pay for an HDR TV, the brighter the TV will go and the darker the TV will go, and as such you will have a higher dynamic range. So just because it says HDR, it doesn't mean you're getting necessarily a brilliant HDR image. And if that sounds confusing, it's because it is. It's not something that's necessarily conveyed very well. But if you simply want the best TVs out there, then you should look at getting one that has the UHD premium badge on it, because that takes some of the choice aspect out of it for you, and you don't have to work out which one is better than the other. You just look at the badge and go, okay, that's been certified as a really nice TV that has the technical ability to actually do the things that these UHD Blu-ray discs and other content can show you. And so then, that's what 4K is, that's what HDR is, but what about these new devices? Are they worth picking up? Well, you've got UHD Blu-ray, and this requires a new player, a new disc, so if you have a Blu-ray player, it's not UHD. And assuming you do have those two things, you are going to be getting a 4K image, you're going to be getting 4K up to 60 frames a second, and you're also getting HDR and 10-bit color, and that basically means you're getting better image quality as long as you've got the hardware that does support it. Now, you are going to need a device that has HDCP 2.2. That's the only bit of technical information I really want you to remember, because if you have an older generation 4K TV or something like this, which is a 4K monitor, but it doesn't have HDMI 2.0 with HDCP 2.2, you will not be able to play UHD Blu-rays. I know that's like a technical bit of information, but please believe me on this one. Please do, if you're going to do anything before you buy a 4K device, just make sure it's got HDCP 2.2, because otherwise you will not be able to play UHD Blu-ray discs and some other content on your TV or your monitor. And that's all I want to make sure that you do. But assuming you've got those things, 4K Blu-ray does look great. And one of the best things about 4K Blu-ray is that it's insanely cheap to buy a player, because you can get an Xbox One S. And I was amazed when they said that the Xbox One S had a UHD Blu-ray player in it, because you remember at E3 they came out and said we've got this new Xbox One S, but all the games are going to be available on PC as well. So I'm like, well, I'm never going to buy an Xbox now because I can get all the games on the PC. And then they said it had a UHD Blu-ray player, and I pre-ordered and I bought one straight away, because UHD Blu-ray player and an Xbox One S gives you the complete media package. You can play all of your games upscaled to 4K, you can play games in HDR if you have an HDR TV and you're playing an HDR compatible game, and it's just a really nice addition to any HDR 4K TV. But as good as the Xbox One is, it cannot play games in native 4K. This is where the PS4 Pro comes in. Sadly, it doesn't have a UHD Blu-ray player, and I think that if it did, it would be an insane games console. They're trying to save costs, and their focus is on gaming, 4K gaming, and for some titles it can render in native 4K. So things like The Last of Us, I believe, actually can render in native 4K at around about 30 frames a second, which is fantastic. And it's going to be a really beautiful experience. If you have a big TV or you're sitting close to your 4K screen, it's going to look fab. But not all games on the PS4 Pro will support native 4K, as simply the console is not quite powerful enough to do that. And for a lot of titles, it's going to render between 4K and 1080 and upscale it and display it on your TV in better than 1080 but not quite as good as 4K resolution. But personally, I don't really have that much of a problem, because assuming you've got a normal sized TV, so a 49-inch TV, a 55-inch TV, for a lot of people you're probably not going to notice the difference between half 4K and full 4K anyway, because you really have to be close to see all of those pixels anyway. So it's a brilliant option for people that want to actually use their native 4K TV in at least a very close to native 4K resolution and get a fantastic looking image. But if you do want the absolute best of the best, you're going to need a 4K gaming PC. And this isn't me being a PC fanboy or anything, that's just the way it is, but you are going to need a very powerful gaming PC to do that. And you're going to need a graphics card that costs a lot of money to actually render in 4K. But assuming that you do have that, you're going to be able to output in native 4K. And this is something I've been doing for years, and it really can look fantastic. But once again, you're going to need an appropriately large TV or sit close to it to actually get the most out of it. For some games like Civilization 6, let's say, you're not going to need such a powerful GPU, and on a 4K monitor like this, it can look fantastic. So it doesn't matter whether you're rendering it on a native 4K TV or a 4K monitor, a PC can do the best job as long as you've got the appropriate hardware. But that's all it is, it's about hardware. The Xbox One S is fairly not quite so powerful, and the most expensive PC money can buy is obviously very powerful. But the PS4 Pro does a very nice job of sitting in the middle. And with that, it brings us towards the end of the video. To summarise this in one neat and tidy sentence, UHD 4K TVs are worth buying. The trouble is though that once again, the more you spend, the higher quality of TV you're getting, especially when it comes to HDR. And if you already have a 4K TV, then it may not be worth upgrading. It entirely depends on your mindset and how much you value HDR. Assuming you've got a TV though, or a monitor that can display HDCP 2.2, you're going to be able to get the benefits of UHD Blu-ray. And if you have a games console that's an Xbox One S, a PS4 Pro, or you have a gaming PC, you're going to be able to play or at least output games in 4K, but you're going to need a more powerful console or a more powerful gaming PC to actually play games in native 4K. What are my recommendations for games consoles? I'm sure that will come in a future video when I get my hands on the PS4 Pro, but all I will say is that I've been very happy so far with the Xbox One S. And so with that, that is the end of this video. If it's been useful and it's helped you, please hit that like button. I was very tempted to say if this video hits 2,500 likes, I will go out, I will buy an HDR television, and I will do a HDR is it worth it video. And I'm going to stick by that. So if we hit by 2,500 likes, I will do that. But I'm not really sure I can afford it, but hopefully by the time we actually hit that, I will have the money. But there we go. If you've enjoyed this video though, like I say, smash that like button and get it to 2,500. If you haven't, hit the dislike button. Subscribe for more videos just like this. And if you do want to see that original video, you can find it in the top right hand corner, along with the Xbox One S video. If you want to learn more about this 4K monitor, you can find that in the eye as well. And as soon as we've got some HDCP 2.2 monitors, you can bet I'll be very excited and we will be looking at that. I must thank you for watching once again. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks to Corsair for sponsoring the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.